this is where Tselane comes in. And so, as I said, she has made her own way, found her own way into the mountains, into the mountaineering experience. And I'm hoping that she can help us help others to find their way in similar ways. She's an A&E nurse and a ski instructor, and she's also a very competent climber and alpinist. So she ticks all the boxes as far as I'm concerned as being a qualified mountaineer. And I want to take this opportunity to hand you over to her now so that she can tell us a bit more about how she's made her way into that area. Tselane, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, my name's Tselane, and yeah, I'm an emergency nurse from Sheffield. I climb a fair bit in Sheffield at the moment in the Peak District, a lot of trad and bouldering at the moment. But my main thing is winter seasons. I work in Switzerland as a ski instructor and emergency first aid responder in the Swiss Alps. So that's fantastic. And I am also part of the Women's Alpine Adventure Club, which is actually how I was introduced to Dave. So I did this presentation for the Women's Alpine Adventure Club a few weeks ago. And it was kind of, I was asked to sort of do this because we wanted more information for club members, for our guides, for instructors to start sort of considering sort of what the current arena is with regards to diversity and inclusion in our club. So Dave attended and enjoyed it, I believe, found it useful, and so obviously has asked me to present tonight for the Eagles. My involvement in just Women's Alpine Adventure Club has been to do a bit of content writing with regards to diversity, working on diversity within the club, and also when we are free from all the lockdowns, bits of mountain medicine kind of skills workshops as well. And that club is, I mean, it's great. We are a community of women that support other women to access high mountain pursuits. So through skills workshops, we do things like ice climbing, backcountry skiing, avalanche awareness, those sorts of things through skill shares, and just sort of building up other women, encouraging other women to get involved and find adventure buddies and that kind of thing. So this talk is angled from women's experiences, and yeah, looking at ways in which the club and this club as well can become more inclusive and diverse, and how we can sort of work together with smaller organisations and smaller projects that are sort of more grassroots, to help support people getting into bigger mountain environments. So I've kind of looked at some of the entry points. So how people get into green spaces, then progress onto things like hiking and climbing, and then skiing and mountaineering and that sort of thing. So it's worth mentioning that I've mostly interviewed Black women. And so whilst this talk is about diversity, I recognise obviously this is just a small aspect of diversity, and there are many aspects that as the outdoor community we need to consider, you know, disabilities and lots of other aspects, but this is a perspective that I'm coming from. So I hope to enlighten you not only with my experiences as a woman and woman of colour, and some of the barriers I've sort of had to overcome in getting into this scene, but also there are perspectives from other women, so I hope you sort of enjoy that. I use the terms as well, Black and minority ethnic, or BAME, or people of colour, sort of interchangeably, just to sort of describe that group of people. But And also, yes, there are, I think Kathy is going to put in some of the links as we go along. There are some links to the different organisations and different support groups and that sort of thing. So keep an eye out for them, especially if you're an outdoor instructor or a guide or anything like that, you might find it useful. So this is just a sort of whistle-stop tour on the topic. We'll sort of have a quick look at my story, some UK Black history, some of the interview insights from the women, some forward steps, and a Q&A with myself and Brienne, who is one of my my mentor colleague in this process. So Brienne, just a little background to some of the women that we'll be talking to. So Brienne, Richardson, Jameson. Brienne is based in Texas in the US. She's actually the first Black African-American woman to have bolt, route set and done first ascents in Texas. So she talks about some of her challenges that she's sort of encountered as a woman of colour, but also she has a documentary coming out on this topic next year, I believe. Brie is also a mother of twins. She skis, she caves, she climbs. She's also a diversity lead as well. So she's had some really great insights. Oops. Sorry, just a moment. We have insights as well from Carmen. Carmen is the founder of Project One Climbing, which is it's a project that is dedicated to inclusion and increase, basically, for young people to access climbing walls in their area, getting subsidised spots. Carmen works really hard working with communities, and she helps to improve partnerships basically with climbing walls and local community groups to increase the uptake of young climbers. So it's really looking at increasing the access. Project One increases education and promotes diversity within the UK climbing scene. And then they also will then move children from going indoors to outdoor environments. And that's mostly for Black and minority ethnic communities as well. Oops. We have some insights from Kim Taylor. Kim is a colleague of mine, a ski instructor. She's also a gender studies major. She's a professional ski instructor and a woman going through the levels in a tough male-dominated sport. She's based over in Ottawa in Canada. And then we've got insights from the ladies, some ladies from the Black Girls Hike group. And so there's Delia Louisa, Natalie Oldfield-Williams and Natalie Reid, and they give really good insights into their lived experiences as Black women getting involved in a new activity like hiking. So a little bit about my story. So I was born in the UK. My mum is white British, my dad is Black South African. My family here is mostly white, and it's been fantastic because I've had great proximity to outdoor green spaces, and we frequently had visited the countryside when I was younger. But as Dave said, it's actually, I didn't come through sort of school or anything like that into the outdoors. It's more been in the last 5 years, actually, in my late 20s, that I found getting into the outdoors. I found a love for the sport, and I found that the outdoors have been really defining for me, and I've sort of progressed myself. Because actually before then, I have to say, like, the closest thing to outdoor experiences for me was something like a canal walk to a pub when I was living in the city, or like camping at a festival. Those were the kind of outdoor experiences that I was having. And strangely enough, actually for me, it was when I was living in a big city. I was living in Berlin in Germany, and I discovered the indoor climbing world. I discovered indoor climbing gyms, and that sort of springboarded me. That was my entry point then into the great outdoors, because I quickly developed a passion for the sport. I wanted to get outside, I wanted to get into the mountains. And so that's where I kind of, that's where everything really changed for me, was from the indoor climbing gyms. So I wanted to make a life for myself in the mountains. I was that passionate. And so I ended up moving to Chamonix in the French Alps, which was fantastic. And I really flourished in developing my outdoor mountaineering skills. I started sort of, getting into alpinism, ski touring, and between that and as well doing my winter seasons in the Swiss Alps, I started to become quite proficient in what I was doing. And I skied big mountains for the first time, like you can see here, amazing ski touring routes in Chamonix. And so, yeah, I had some amazing opportunities and good people to get out with and to feel safe with, and that was the main thing. So some of the barriers for me were, I would say cost, obviously, is always a big barrier. Having people to feel safe with, and then also my own personal, building my own confidence were the main barriers that I kind of had to overcome. But I feel like I was able to overcome them with the lifestyle that I'd chosen, the type of job that I had, my upbringing with my amazing mum that would get me out into the Peak District as well. So yeah, I was kind of quite privileged in that way. But there was something deeper as well for me. I do think that there was something on a sort of psychological level where I was sort of sometimes didn't feel like I belonged in these spaces. And as I took things to new levels in alpine sports, I started to, well, I saw less and less women, especially, and women of colour in these sorts of environments. And I did often wonder where the Black people were. And I did come up against things like people asking sort of questions like where I'd come from, or sort of touching my hair without asking, or passing comments about my skin colour, and as though, yeah, so sort of things like that that made me start to feel quite uncomfortable, and a hyper awareness of being the only one like me in that environment. So I did really feel like the only one. And recently I've thought more deeply on this, especially after the events that happened this summer, and what happened with this big event with George Floyd passing. And it really blew a lot of people's minds last summer, didn't it? And it got me thinking, and I wondered why there aren't a more diverse group of people in the outdoor industry. I did start to wonder. I thought, well, maybe my fellow Black women just don't want to be in these spaces. Maybe it's just not for them. But that's simply just not true. It kind of comes down to opportunities and various other things. And for me, I realized that there were certain things that became sort of stumbling blocks. And when I sort of track back a bit, start to remember some of the things that I would hear when I was growing up. So I would hear, Black people can't swim, Black people don't ski, that's a white girl sport, you've got balls to do that, these kind of almost like labels or putting people in boxes. And so you start to hear these sort of types of sexist and racist remarks, and they have been mental stumbling blocks for me. A sort of reminder of the exclusivity of certain sports. And so, yeah, why wouldn't you think that growing up? Because when you hear something enough times, you do start to believe it. So I got researching, and I discovered that there truly is something called an adventure gap. And I've kind of coined this phrase from a gentleman called James Edward Mills. He actually wrote a whole book on this topic, and it was also about this expedition Denali. So definitely check that out in the comments chat or the links afterwards. So let's have a look at why there is an adventure gap. So evidence states that around 98% of Black and minority ethnic communities live in the inner city in the UK. So really, when we think about this, the lived experience is not in the outdoors. That's a little bit of a breakdown of the ethnic groups most likely to live in urban areas. And then when we look a little bit deeper, so had a look at national parks. So it'd be interesting if anyone's got any guesses as to the percentage of Black and minority ethnic people that access national parks. Maybe you could put them in the chat at a guess. But the statistics show that certain groups that access national parks are especially disconnected. So we see that most visits are by the same kind of people repeatedly that tend to be better off, less diverse. And those that miss out tend to be older, the younger groups, so adolescents, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and Black and Asian and minority ethnic communities. So the answer is actually only 2% of Black and minority ethnic communities use our national parks in the UK. So it's quite a low number really, and that has jumped up from 1% to 2% actually during lockdown. So it has changed a little bit for the better. So yeah, I mean, it's not, as we've mentioned, it's not actually just a race issue, it is a poverty issue as well. But for the purposes of this talk, we're looking at race. So do we underplay Black history in the UK? So at the time of George Floyd's death and the events of last summer, I remember hearing a lot of things being sort of branded around, and like, we don't live in a racist country, and UK racism isn't as bad as in the US. And perhaps this is true on some level, but also when we kind of look at history, it does kind of smash these biases in the face a wee bit. So we only actually have to look at the Race Relation Act of 1965, which, well, to realise that the UK history was just as murky as the US. And this act was put into place to this piece of legislation that was used to sort of address the UK discrimination, but it did come quite late on. And at this time, we had Black people that were being excluded or restricted from accessing public social spaces. And apart from the fact that a lot of Blacks had 3 or 4 jobs, so they wouldn't have actually time to access national parks or green spaces, there were also real restrictions on Blacks going to theatres, to swimming pools, using public transport, buying houses, or staying in certain B&Bs. So the list was kind of endless. And so I think about the accessing swimming pools, the restrictions there. When you think back to the initial stumbling blocks I mentioned, and when we hear Black people can't swim, well, actually, Black people probably couldn't swim for a while because they were restricted from actually going to public swimming pools. So you start to see where these ideas have kind of come from and where these systemic issues are rooted. So it was a very isolating time and probably quite hard to integrate. And so a lot of Blacks would stay within their communities for support. And at this time, the Black community actually had to prioritize a very different prioritize different hierarchy of needs compared to their white counterparts. So yeah, these are deep systemic issues that are deep rooted, and still today we have to work hard to overcome them. And at the same time that we had Black people being restricted or not even allowed to use public parks, we also had this renaissance period of mountain climbing. And so we saw a new class of predominantly white men building the outdoor climbing scene. So in the 1950s and times like that, we had a whole the whole institution was really built during a very sort of racist time. And so the climbing community at that time was probably as undiverse as you can get. So the heritage of our climbing scene, our mountaineering scene, is deeply white and could be quite unwelcoming for someone who doesn't have that cultural lineage, that cultural history of mountain spaces. But there is enough room for everyone. And actually, Brienne had some really interesting insights into what nature might mean for different people. I mean, it doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. So let me just find the link.
Oftentimes, our people, when we think of being outside in nature, we're thinking about the fact that most of the time we were forced to be outside in nature. It wasn't by choice. And so, whereas I feel like white folks are very quick to think about recreation in nature, you have to realize that minorities that's not always our first go-to, thing that we think of. It's usually, what our ancestors have had to undergo in nature and how it wasn't by choice. We have been so far removed, from nature. And when we look at our ancestors prior to, things like, enslavement and, oppression, we were just as outdoorsy as everyone else. And I say we to include every minority, because every individual minority has its own amazing story about how it connected with how their people connected with nature.
So we have a lack of cultural history in outdoor spaces, due to perhaps having been restricted or not allowed to be in those spaces, sort of from times past. And so it's easy to understand why it might be uncomfortable to get involved in mountain environments. And there have been, when we think about it, systemic injustices that have been endured by generations, that it does take a toll on a people. So you can see why Black and minority ethnic people have lost a connection with nature, and why perhaps it has not been able to be fully established. And so our communities and our cultural experience, has actually been the local park mostly in recent years. So the outdoor industry we need to understand that the Black community is only just beginning to learn what the outdoors is, because it's not been a lived experience. So how can we get alpinism to catch up? I've got some insights from Kim, a gender studies major, who discusses a little bit about the ski industry. Oh. Excuse me.
There's nothing to catch up to. It's not behind. That's literally just what society is at right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that the outdoor industry has less representation than other sports. It's that lack of representation is in everything. It's in, like film, movies, so many things. And so I just thought, then that also means the change can't just happen in our sports. It has to happen. It's a bigger change than just in the sports industry that has to happen.
So whilst we have this big societal change that kind of has to happen, it's also important to realize that the main issue is actually quite hard to understand, because we don't have any real data on this topic. And this was really highlighted to me when speaking with Carmen. We discussed the issues regarding the climbing scene, and here are some snippets from our conversation.
We haven't got any statistics. How can we talk about something that we can't fully understand? We're at a really hard starting point, I think, for individuals like us, at least. Some market research, this is the thing. It's getting surveys out there. It's finding out genuinely from women what does appeal to them and what doesn't. What is it that made you try climbing? Was it that you were introduced by a friend, or was it that you saw an advert on TV? When you can figure that out, again, it's all of this. Once we can figure out the cause of something, then we can create a solution. That's why I would say we just have to start asking these questions as widely as possible. You know, we've got organisations like the BMC, ABC. They've got a huge connection and huge reach to all the climbing communities. We could be doing surveys. We could be asking about all of this, the ethnic makeup of the groups, all of it. And I'm sure there are surveys and such that exist, but just not about this. So if we want to invite people in, we need to change our marketing. We need to go to different places. We need to go through different people, and it needs to look different from what it is right now, because what it is right now, like, is enough for a certain criteria of people. It's not all encompassing. So yeah, until people realize that, because that's the thing, it's like, well, but we post that there's this meetup and we post that there's this, but who is it going to? It's going to your white climby following, no one else. Yeah. So when are you going to be getting new people coming in from what, the one black woman's supposed to bring every black woman she knows with her? Or, you know, that's the kind of thing. If you're only advertising to your own circle, it's never going to change.
Fab. So what we glean from that is we need some statistics, we need some market research. And this was definitely highlighted to me when doing this project, because the information I got was pretty much anecdotal. We need marketing from big organisations and councils, and it needs to be for a wider, more diverse group of people, and to be in a quite different way from what it is at the moment. The industry also needs to be adequately represented, and that's on all levels, from the very top down from the very top down, from people that are diverse and from people that understand women, understand women of colour, women of religion, that kind of thing. And we also need to make the industry way more inviting. So taking into account things like cultural differences, faiths, backgrounds, skill levels, all these things that need to be considered. I do believe it's the responsibility of everyone on every level to try and see where we can fit into that, and to look into these areas individually. But actually as well, it probably would be helpful, it would be down to government, perhaps some government reforms to make improvements on things like transport links to green spaces, or setting up diversity panel boards with patrons for organisations, that kind of thing. So how can we make the outdoor industry more inviting? So we know that being in green spaces and national parks is a fantastic entry point for bigger mountain pursuits like skiing, climbing, mountaineering. So it's about getting people out of the inner city and into a space where they feel comfortable in an environment with people that they feel comfortable with. And so organised events can be really helpful for this, because not many women want to or feel like they have the confidence to just go and do something completely on their own. So when we look at organised groups, there are groups out there, and so projects like Black Girls Hike has actually been really instrumental in supporting Black women into getting into the outdoors, and this can be a really important first step for many women, and Black Girls Hike is pretty much what it says on the tin. And so when speaking to the club founder, Brienne, we discussed how actually something I hadn't always considered, that national park can be a really intimidating space for people, especially when there are people there that don't look like you, or when you don't have the right skills or even the right clothes, or the transport that you might need. And so it's important that you find a good group of people that you feel safe with. Here, Brienne also mentions the importance.
I feel like the question of our safety is sometimes amplified when we are the only people like us in an environment. And I think that you just have to find it within yourself to push forward. If it's something that you really want to do, it's okay to try to find a squad to do it with, find a group of people that are like-minded, find folks that you can trust, and, explore those endeavors with them. I think that safety is like a really big thing. Being in the rock climbing world and the caving world, and knowing that, you know, a lot of these things that we do, mountaineering, you know, I'm sure, you know, it's really, really white male dominated. And I think that that's okay to step into those spaces alone if you have the confidence to do so. But for women who necessarily weren't raised like that, or they just don't have that within them to feel comfortable in those environments, I think that finding others that they can do it with would be really important.
Absolutely. So here's just the kind of a few of the projects out there that have been really good for underrepresented communities. And it's important to mention at this stage, you know, cost is a major socioeconomic barrier. So the importance of subsidised spots for people have been really important, really, for underprivileged communities. Snow camps is a fantastic charity, actually. So they're based in the indoor snow domes. They do a lot of youth work with people from like inner city areas, and they'll get kids through the levels of ski instructing, and then eventually they can get out into the Alps and have really good job opportunities as well. They also do things like talent scouting, so that's a really great step for underprivileged communities. And there's all sorts on there as well. Flock Together's a Black and minority ethnic group that do bird watching in London. Obviously Black Girls Hike, Project One. So there are things out there, and I think these groups are really important. They do exist out of sort of necessity. But unfortunately, not everyone thinks that way. And so, you know, this is some of the backlash, couple of examples of many that some of these groups will get. And speaking to a lot of these groups, to the sort of the club members or the directors, you know, this unfortunately is a common occurrence. People don't always understand the need for safe spaces for minorities, but unfortunately this kind of backlash can be quite draining on club members to have to deal with, and actually it kind of highlights the real need for these groups to exist, because they do exist out of necessity, because people don't feel safe, or they don't feel like their voices are being heard, or they don't feel like they can safely integrate into these spaces. So it's important to build skills in a safe environment before people can progress onto something more challenging like skiing or alpinism. This was really highlighted to me actually during the conversation with the Black Girls Hike, some of the members there, when we talked about gaining confidence in a new activity like hiking. And sometimes just without the support of your peers, it can actually take years to build up confidence and get where you want to be.
Before, I'd be just too scared of getting lost.
Yeah, that is a major barrier you've picked up about map reading skills and getting lost and knowing where you're going. It's like, yeah, it's a learned thing, isn't it? And if you haven't accessed that with someone or been taught how to do that, then it's definitely, there's not many women who walk on their own.
So are we truly welcoming to people of all backgrounds, faiths, body sizes, disabilities and cultures? Does it matter what you wear when you're in the outdoors? Do we understand the nuances of a diverse group of women or a diverse group of people? Are we really allowing people to show up authentically? Now, here are some thoughts about dress code in the outdoors that really kind of opened my eyes as well.
I always used to think that, like, kind of outdoors was like this kind of, I don't know, like this older kind of man with like the hat and like the small tiny glasses and like the car keys and everything.
Like, red gaiters.
Yeah, the
red gaiters.
The gators. Oh my gosh. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I like fashion. That's also a barrier as well, isn't it? I didn't really think about it, but to me, like, it felt like I was a bit like, oh, I stick out, like, because I stick out anyway because I'm black, but I stick out as well because I don't want to like wear just black, or I want to wear like a pink one. But like also like there's a lack of colours for women. I've learned in terms of shops. So there'll be pink, there'll be blue, and there'll be black.
Day before, thankfully the shops were still open. I went to TK Maxx and found a pair of brown Merrell walking shoes. They weren't even boots. They were kind of almost just up to the ankle bone, not even quite mid. And they were brown. Like, that is not the colour I would have ever gone for. But there was nothing else, and they were in my size. They fit, and they were so comfortable, and they were slightly waterproof. I was just like, man, I'm just gonna look like I felt like I was gonna, like you said, Louisa, fit into that stereotype of those shit brown shoes and a pair of black waterproof trousers, because that's what I had. And I was like, do you know what? That's just, it's gonna have to be. And actually, they sufficed for the thing that I needed. They were not expensive, and they did the job. But I was just like, I just did not want brown. But then actually, when I came home, another girl who I bumped into on the train on the way there, she also had brown. I said, oh, you must be going to the Black Girls Hike, because we're both wearing these shit brown shoes, so we must be going to the same place. She was like, yeah. But she pointed out the fact that she got brown shoes was because actually the mud, and actually it would be easy to kind of disguise it. And she was 100% right. So I'm glad I've got shit brown shoes.
So the perceptions of what it was like to be in the outdoors, or what you had to look like, were obviously quite clear from Natalie and Louisa. There was a clear image portrayed of those who went into the great outdoors. And really, I guess it just highlights that women want to get involved in something that looks appealing. Some women, at least, anyway. But unfortunately, the alpine scene doesn't always deliver very well on this. This is something that Carmen said.
I think that climbing and alpinism and mountaineering, this umbrella of sports, just has never been targeted to us well, or in a way that is actually appealing. Like, don't just make everything pink and go, right, women, come on to a mountain. That's like, it's not going to work. People are going to go, I don't want to be part of your sexist bloody regime. What is this?
And as a side note, when we were all talking, every one of us actually mentioned black hair. So whether you think it's a small thing or not, a small issue or not, having some understanding of this sort of nuance is quite enlightening, I think. So Natalie explained how being part of a group of black hikers where women understood the nuances, like hair, dealing with black hair in the outdoors, because it is a thing, and that could sometimes put women at ease, and went a long way with helping black women feel seen and understood in an unfamiliar environment. So here's Natalie on the getting hair wet.
It was just little things. So like things like, for me, like getting your hair wet and having a conversation with somebody about somewhere that I went, and getting my hair wet was like comedy for so many people around me. Obviously you laugh about it yourself, but like, this is serious. Like, I do not want to get my hair wet, because you know that situation after the hair is wet is long. But I understand, for a lot of women, just sweating it out is an issue. They want to do the thing, they want to do the activity. We know that for them it's a big thing, but if it was another like type of group, not everybody within that group is going to be as understanding or tolerant.
I'm like, okay, I'll just be responsible and do a protective style, and which is going to end up in braids, right? And then, inevitably, like, it often happens when I'm, kind of the only person of color in the room, I'm going to get someone who says, can I touch your hair? Oh, that's so cool. How'd you do that? And, I'd ask those questions, because if it makes you feel more comfortable being around folks of color, then, all the better. Because it shouldn't be like this thing where we're like exoticized, right?
Absolutely. And so if you are an outdoor instructor, or you have Black or mixed race friends who are getting into the outdoor scene, there are some links as well, just regarding black hair discrimination, and also managing black hair in the outdoors. So Melanin Brave Camp, and also the Halo Collective. You can check them out at the end. So this lady is Zara Mahmoud. I had a chat with her as well, and just regarding her experiences in the outdoors. She mostly hikes in the Lowland area, in the Trossachs, and for any outdoor instructors or leaders out there, there are some religious aspects definitely to consider. And so things like praying, active Muslims will be praying several times a day, and there's also things to consider, like hijab wearing women that may need a private space to change their hairstyle, to get a helmet on. So considering things like that, and always it never hurts just to contact people beforehand and just check in and say, you know, is there anything that we can consider? Are there any cultural or religious aspects that need to be considered? So representation. So most of the women I spoke to, we all agreed that representation at all levels was really important and vital, whether it's from the very top down or of the board influencing big decisions, or whether it's being part of a club of people that you can really relate to. So having a diverse mix of people within there. And speaking with my colleague Kim, she gave great insight into why gender representation in particular has been important, and how it has really changed in the ski industry.
It's just a mirror to society, like that's very obvious. And yeah, so more and more women are in ski movies now, are out on the mountain, are instructors, so that's awesome. But when we talk about people of color, even people with disabilities, just people who ski differently, people with different bodies, there's just such a huge underrepresentation. And one of my favorite quotes is, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And just this idea of, even for me growing up, never having a female trainer, never seeing a level 4 woman, it almost just makes you just don't think about that. You just don't think that that's a direction I can take because I haven't seen it yet.
So it's probably going to take a long time before we do see adequate representation. Women as a whole, but obviously especially those of Black and minority ethnic communities. And representation, really, as Kim was saying, is almost like a hyper exposure of what we see in society. But we have to remember that we can't make a truly inviting environment unless it's adequately represented at all levels. But that is going to take time. And it's not about tokenism or partiality. It's about truly giving people of colour opportunities to flourish and perform to the best of their abilities, supporting us and giving us a platform. I found one of the hard parts of my journey was actually self-doubt. With alpine sports, as I mentioned before, with those stumbling blocks, and whether I'm out climbing or skiing or mountaineering, I do actually feel this pressure to perform. I feel pressure to perform, and it's almost as though I feel these additional eyes on me, and because of my skin colour, it's almost like this feeling that I'm not just representing myself, but every other Black woman. And perhaps that's unfair to think that people would make assumptions about one Black woman's based on one Black woman's performance. But I also do wonder if people do apply these sweeping assumptions to minorities. I do have to remind myself that everyone is there ultimately to have fun, and yeah, so we're all just there having fun, and it's about quietening that inner voice, and that's so important, because the outdoor community, yeah, people are just there out to enjoy the space and have fun. So that's my little self-talk I have to do. So it is about starting small with organisations like snow camps, like Project One, and the work that they're doing is so important to sort of close that adventure gap. And for clubs like the Eagle Ski Clubs, making these potential collaborations, more connections with groups that are solving some of these social injustices, and helping underprivileged young women or men and women to get into the outdoor spaces. We as a community can then guide people into national parks, and from there you then sort of springboard these movements for anyone that might want to have bigger experiences in big mountains. So it's about really giving people opportunity. People that want to support women of colour, I think we need to make sure that these efforts, women of colour, people of colour, that we're not making these efforts disingenuous or contrived. And there's a fine line, because this is a really trendy topic right now, and it can be quite hard to discern organisations that really do truly care. But ultimately, the conversations and the outcomes will improve when we are part of the conversations. So there is a bigger issue as well, and why this is all quite important to me is because, you know, when we think from a health perspective, it's so vital that people are accessing and have the opportunity to access outdoor spaces. It's vital for health and well-being. When we talk about global pandemics, we immediately think to coronavirus, but there is also a pandemic of mental illness. And so being inclusive and encouraging to communities is really vital. Not only this, but we want people to be engaged in their environment. We need people to be part of these conversations, because there are bigger issues to do with our environment. So we need people to know that the glaciers are melting, that there's less ski resorts opening because we aren't getting the levels of snow that we need, that plastic is being washed up on our shores, and that there are you know, species being extinct. And you only know that if you are accessing these spaces, if you're accessing your natural environment. So we do need to be welcoming for new groups of people if we have any chance of getting people participating in their natural spaces. And sorry, what do I mean by this as well? So let me just go into this a bit more deeply, actually, because when we look at, when I was looking at basically the general the direction of the general population demographics, census bureaus are predicting that the world will be majority minority. So as our world grows, increasingly multicultural, we need people of all races and ethnicities to be stewards, and stewards for protecting our environment, basically. Because when we go back to the initial first fact I mentioned about the percentage of people using our national parks and outdoor spaces, they are actually dominated at the moment by one small group of society. And when that happens, there are major issues then on our natural environment, because if we want to preserve our natural spaces for future generations, it does need to be a joint effort. So moving forward from all this, I think, you know, what can we glean from this? The responsibility does lie with those that are dominating the spaces to prepare and be welcoming to minorities. Ultimately, we don't want to still have to rely on these exclusive groups like Black Girls Hike or Black Trail Runners, or, you know, these exclusive groups. But at the moment, unfortunately, society perhaps isn't quite there yet for us to take that away. Also, we want people, we want more people getting involved in our sports, don't we? And getting involved in skiing and in climbing and alpinism, because it does push our sports forwards. It improves the vitality of the sport. You know, we then see, well, we never know who the next, like, Sophia Dannenberg is going to be, or Molly Thompson-Smith, these amazing climbers or mountaineers. So that is important as well. And finally, we do have to remember that, I guess, as an outdoor community, we are generally very welcoming. We do care about the environment and we care about other people. We're not a racist community, but unfortunately, interpretation always trumps intention in the end. So we just have to sort of listen and be willing to listen and willing to hear the sides of the story. I just have a final comment from Carmen about how we progress.
Everyone's mind has been blown recently, I feel like, in one way or another, in relation to it. We're being educated, white people are certainly being educated. How do we translate that into something tangible and into change? I don't know. Maybe we need time to process it, and then the ideas will come. As much as everyone wants immediate change, this is immediate action. This is action. It might not seem like much is happening, but there is things happening. The conversations are going on, and just because the whole world isn't sharing its achievements doesn't mean that it's stopped, you know. And I think that there's this sort of idea that everyone's not talking about it anymore. Well, no, people aren't posting on the internet anymore, but it's still happening. We're still doing stuff. We're doing this right now.
Absolutely. So we're having the conversations, which is a really key part, and people are lending an ear, and we're listening to other sides of the story. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the wonderful women in this talk. For me, it's been a really insightful, amazing process, and I've met some incredible people along the way. Thanks to the ladies that were involved. And there's a few other parts on that screen. I don't know if that'll be available at the end, but some reading materials and some links to the organised groups. So yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, well, so Brie has very adequately answered the question, actually, which is great. Thanks, Brie. So it's just having a suggestion as to what to do as a mountain guide. And I think this could equally apply to Eagle Ski Club leaders, of course, Dave, which is to, if you've got an uneven ratio of, say, 5 blokes and 1 woman, then what sort of steps should I take positively in order to reduce the feeling of vulnerability? That was I suppose that was the thrust of the question, and Brie has answered that with a fantastic prepared script almost, which is great. And then there was suggestions from Anne-Marie and Chris Watkins, who had an unpleasant experience. Oh, no, certainly Chris sounds like she had a very unpleasant experience in a hut. And certainly, you know, as a guide, if I've got a single woman in the hut, then I'll make sure that she's at the end of, you know, there's dortoirs, so you can't get away from that fact, but making sure the woman is on the end and not in the middle, that's a pretty standard practice. But any other suggestions that Tselane might have, you know, as you work as a, you know, like a fellow mountain professional, Tselane, you know, any other suggestions that you might have for old white male guides?
Brie, would you just give your answer? I just would be interested to hear that initially.
It's where was it?
Sure. So what I wrote was that I think that, let me just go back up. So my answer to that question was, have an honest conversation with your female client. For example, reaching out and saying, hey, so I noticed that you'll be the only female on the trip, and we're so happy to have you. I really want to be supportive of any unique needs you may have. So feel free to disclose any accommodations that I could provide to make your experience as comfortable as everyone else's. I didn't say more comfortable because it's all about equity. And I think that there's a big difference when we talk about diversity to address the difference between equity and equality. Equality is giving everyone the same treatment. And because we don't all start in the same place, that can often create an even larger disparity between a various group of individuals. So I think that making sure that everyone gets the same experience is fostering an equitable environment and inherently being inclusive. So then the second part that I put to that answer was, like, as an example, if a female client is on her menstrual cycle, she may need more frequent breaks to take care of her sanitary needs. So if you foster an inclusive environment by normalizing equitable practices, women will ultimately feel more safe and comfortable participating.
Cool.
Yeah, brilliant answer. And yeah, I think nothing much more to add to that. It was more just, you know, obviously the first thing that jumps to mind is the female's menstrual cycle, and that can be a thing that can hold you back sometimes. So exactly as Brie said, like approaching people beforehand, and I think that just can't hurt to just say, is there anything I can do to accommodate you? Yeah, so just having an awareness of that. Yeah,
certainly it's a very standard practice for me as a mountain guide to say, if you've any physical problems that you've got, and this is, you know, irrespective of gender or race, whatever, any physical problems that you have, it's really important that I know about those so I can make adjustments accordingly. So I suppose what I was trying to probe at was how much of an exception, how much of a fuss should I make or not?
Personally, I mean, I suppose it depends on each woman, doesn't it? But personally, I would appreciate, you know, if you're going with a guide, I would appreciate being approached beforehand, for sure. And then it gives you time to think, right, well, actually, what are the things that I need to consider? Yeah, so yeah, I think approaching beforehand, that's a really good step, because that's all part of your preparation, isn't it, for preparing your group. And perhaps even discussing with other group members, just, you know, that there is going to be a female with us, be prepared that we're going to be making these additional stops, because, you know, it may be that people are thinking, well, why are we having to do additional things for this one person? So also, you know, preparing other people for that, I would say.
I must say my ratio now is 65-35, so it's getting there in terms of client days, gender split. So
yeah.
So Lonnie, one of the things that I'd like to add to what you were saying is that and this is one of the things that we push here in the US, when folks are wanting to be more inclusive and more equitable, it's often considered a little taboo to ask questions when you're dealing with an ethnic minority. But if you approach the situation the same way you would approach the situation from someone that is a physical minority or someone who has a developmental disability, then I think that you end up getting much more comfortable addressing these things. So the same way that you would prepare as a guide to take a participant who has a physical disability or a mental disability out with you, in the same way that you would prep the group that is going to be with you, is I think the same way that you should handle it when you have a person who is of a gender minority or is perhaps of an ethnic minority. I've been asked on alpine trips before, do you need sunscreen? Because that's a fair question. I have different skin than my white counterparts. So I think that just being honest with those questions, and I think that can definitely help. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah, great question.
Can we pass it on, I think, to Christine? Do you just want to unmute yourself and pick up your question about points of entry? Because that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I was thinking that as a ski mountaineering club and the way we work, people come into it who are already skiers or already mountaineers, and they've already got to be at least a certain level of skiing and have had some hill experience, so that they can come into the club fairly rough on their mountaineering, fairly a bit, maybe not the greatest skier, but they've got to have skiing and that kind of background. And then we can give them opportunities to strengthen that, as Kathy was talking about at the beginning, the various training and the different kind of things we can do. But we're not really going to be linking into people who are hiking, and we can then introduce them to skiing, for example. They've already got to be skiers. So I just wondered, are there any entry points where we can attract the right kind of people who are already skiing to help them move on to the next step?
I think, as I mentioned, from the ones I mentioned today, there is Snow Camps, which is a really fantastic charity that is developing young people from inner city areas, getting them into the snow domes, building up their skills there, taking them through their BASI levels, and then they'll go to the Alps and get more opportunities out in the Alps. So, I mean, as a club, that would certainly be a really, it could be an avenue of interest to start sort of making some links with that charity. That's just an idea. But I guess as well, when we're looking at ski touring, it is quite niche, isn't it? You've come through a various pathway to get to that particular point. So I don't know, Brie, did you have anything similar in the US?
We do. We have an organization called the National Brotherhood of Skiers, which was founded by two Black skiers in the 70s who got tired of feeling like the only Black folks on the mountain, and decided to combine all of the various Black ski clubs around the country for an annual summit where everyone met up and got on the slopes. And it's really amazing to see. But one of the more important things that they do is they're a nonprofit, but all of the funds that they raise go towards helping young athletes who have potential to become professional athletes find their way to the Olympic podium. And so they will financially support all of those athletes. And it's a really amazing program that they do, but there are several other programs. That's just the one that comes to the top of mind right now.
There is also, Christine, there's also GB Snow Sports. And I can't remember off the top of my head the lady that is running the diversity, one of the directors. She's running sort of the diversity sort of side of things as well, alongside a gentleman called, I think it's Phil Young. They featured on Ski Sunday a couple of weekends ago, and they did a big feature about diversity and how we can push skiing in the sport. It's definitely worth checking that out. It's the BBC on the 22nd of Feb. You can still catch it. So that was a really good program. But they were saying, they are, similarly to what you're saying, Brie, they are developing youngsters and to get them onto the podium. They're trying to get more diverse groups of skiers and snow sport kids basically through the levels of their skiing and developing them as well. So that's another really good project.
We've got a question from Emily Fitz, and she was saying she'd like to hear a little bit more about the issue around black hair and getting wet. She said she had no idea about this, and she'd like to know more about the practicalities of supporting Black women in this aspect.
Brie, do you want to go first?
So I'm going to stop my video so that you can see what my hair looks like when it's not in its natural state. Right now it's in its natural state. And this is what it's like when it's not in its natural state, which is much different. if my hair were to get wet, it would immediately turn into this. And if I don't have the right products, which are quite a few products to get it under control so that it doesn't get tangled and then potentially come out when I go to comb it. So like, for instance, when I go backpacking and I'm in the backcountry, or if I'm on an expedition underground and I'm caving, I don't carry those products with me. So really the only way for me to manage my hair is to braid it, which takes time ahead of the expedition. And so there's just so much that goes into it. If I go hiking and I don't want my hair to be very unruly and tangled and painful to comb out when I'm done, I have to make sure that I have the proper preparation as far as my gear and everything else, so that it doesn't happen if I were to get wet or to run into rain, or just different things. And so it's definitely something that needs to be considered, that most people don't consider because they don't have to deal with curly hair. So
it's kind of on a practical level when you're doing outdoor sports. I mean, people love black hair and afro hair, and they're very quick on a night out or sort of in a city environment to touch it and be excited by it. But in an outdoor environment where you have you're perhaps sleeping a bit rough, it's just very practically, it can get knotted very quickly. You can end up with big masses of knots, which can be either painful to get out, or you end up having to cut bits out if you've not managed it effectively over that time. So it can be practically quite hard to manage black hair, and so I think, again, if outdoor instructors or people that are working alongside or traveling alongside women of colour with black hair or men of colour with black hair, it's just sort of bearing that in mind. Some women, I've seen women with plastic bags on their heads when they go out hiking, or just various ingenious designs to keep the hair dry, so that they can protect the style that they've got, because it's expensive. That's the other thing, is it can be quite expensive to maintain black hair. So yeah.
Not only that, Tselane, but also neither of us right now, with the way that our hair is, could put on a helmet.
Yeah.
We would need to do some things before we could get a helmet on our heads. So black hair is definitely something that has to be considered beforehand. We can't just go out into nature without considering it.
Yeah.
Can I ask about equipment then? How do you is there specific equipment, is there specific helmets that will accommodate black hair or not?
Personally, no, there isn't anything that would accommodate black hair, but it's more just what I do when I'm skiing. For example, if I want to get a helmet on, I just have to think about, I probably would braid it and keep it braided, and not like sort of some women do, don't they, have two braids back the side, or you might just have to readjust the hairstyle that you've got to have it below, so that the helmet will actually fit on top, to have your hair bunched up at the bottom.
Thank you.
Wait, can I pick up on a question that came from Tim? Because again, we've had some sort of running questions and replies in the chat, so that everyone knows where we're at. Tim asked, is positive discrimination a means of jumpstarting representation and therefore improving diversity? And Bree commented about positive discrimination being an interesting way of saying equity.
So I'm not sure, this may actually be a cultural thing that I'm just not aware of, because I'm in the US and you all are in the UK. So is positive discrimination a common term across the pond, or is that just the chosen term that Tim used?
I'm not British, so I'm not sure what the answer is. I don't think so.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Tselane, have you heard that before?
No, I don't. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what is meant by that, positive discrimination. I don't know.
Sam says it's pretty common. So I've never heard that term before. So immediately when I heard it culturally, it was a bit of a knee jerk for me. And so it sounds like the question was directed towards something like equity. And I think that explaining what equity is and what equality is and kind of looking at it through that lens. Whenever I think of discrimination, I feel like it just has a negative undertone, kind of like a negative connotation. No one wants to be discriminated against. I feel that one of the major barriers to diversity work is that the word is often misconstrued as code for, and I'm going to get very real and honest right now, but it's code for white genocide, which in reality it's not. When folks are doing the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, no one is saying that we want less white people or we want to discriminate against white people by offering more opportunities to those of color or to any other type of minority. It's simply saying that there is space for all of us, because that's just how great nature is. And so we need to make the playing field more level so that we are all able to participate. And so that's where things like equity come in. Positive discrimination is illegal in the UK. The term is positive action. Okay, thanks, Raya, for that. It refers to setting quotas. For example, the percentage of candidates for an election being women. I view it as generally positive. So thank you all for that. I think that it is a cultural thing that I was just ignorant. I didn't know that what that meant. That's my first time hearing that. You learn something every day. I have heard the term a lot. I guess it is a blurred line with what people describe as tokenism. So that is a word that I do know that does hit home. I have experienced being tokenized and exoticized in various places. I'm sure Tselane has also experienced the same thing. An example would be female only list for a parliamentary seat by a specific party. Okay, thank you all for that explanation. So I think that something like that, positive discrimination, with the explanation that you've given, is not something that we are pushing for through initiatives of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What we are pushing for is the fostering of an inclusive culture within the outdoors and that type of recreational space through promoting equity. Not everyone starts with the same things. I posted the link in the chat to a short video that it talks a lot about what systemic oppression is in the US. But if you watch the video, it'll also give you an idea of what minorities have had to undergo systemically that prevents them from being able to historically participate in the same activities that white folks have been able to participate in throughout their generations. And so one of the examples that Tselane gave was that one of the misconceptions is that Black people can't swim. And speaking as an American, I can say that African Americans were not given the opportunity to even share public swimming spaces. There had to be Black beaches specifically for people of color. And so when you think about schools, which in the US are funded by property taxes, and there's things like redlining, which prevents people of color from even being able to purchase homes in certain areas, you start thinking about how these things have systemically impacted minorities and how they just haven't had the same opportunities that white folks have had. And so then we start to get into an understanding of why equity is so much better than equality. If I want to go skiing and I have never had the opportunity to even see snow before, then I may need some different things than someone who grew up in an area who is used to snow and is used to those things. I may not have the proper attire to be safe in that environment. Whereas someone who grew up in that environment may have those things already. And so that's a long way of saying, you know, we all start in different places. And this work is more about meeting folks where they are to get them to a point where they can experience everything as everyone else does.
Can I just do a shout out for Tim, because we've been dissecting your question you typed into the chat. Would you like to join in with your question, or what you were getting at with your question, Tim?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes, I probably used the wrong phrase, and it should have been positive or some better phrase, or affirmative action maybe. I also work for some other sports clubs and a small charity. We've got the same thing as the pale, male and stale attitude going on, which we've got, and we've now adopted affirmative action to, as we found that was the only way that we could actually get women representation and coloured representation into sports and into on the board, because we were as a group of white blokes who were on the board, going back to what was said during the talk, which is if you don't see it, you don't believe it. And we were trying to find a means of putting women and coloured people on boards or in the sport as a way of kickstarting, because otherwise it was taking so long that we were getting nowhere. That's what basically I was trying to get at, was it was a means of kickstarting it so that there was representation and people could see there was representation, and then there would be a follow-up from that. And just come back to the equity thing, is how do you get to equity? How do you get to equality? Without it taking 50, 60 years, or even longer.
I think it is something, unfortunately, that is going to be a long process, because it starts with things like this, which are conversations and people having the confidence to ask questions and to be interested as well, and to realise that there is an initial issue to begin with. So I don't know that there is any way of fast tracking this process, and actually we have to be careful not to encourage tokenism or encourage partiality to particular races. And actually, you know, something I've been pondering on has been you know, the role in which some of these you know, black only clubs do have, because at what point do we say okay, we have now a community of black hikers that are comfortable hiking? When do you start to say, okay, now it's time to integrate, and we're not going to be a black only club anymore? So it's a really tricky topic, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I think we do have to take it steady, and we do have to be slow with this, but it's important that we have you know, I don't know what the phrase is, like stewards or watchmen, people that are gonna be sort of making positive impact, basically.
Can I pick up on a comment, Alex H, if you'd like to join the chat quickly. Alex put in a comment that he manages a further education college adventure education program for school leavers wanting to start their career in adventure education as young instructors, and that it feels like there's so many barriers for young Black people to have a career in the adventure education sector. Alex, if you're with us still, do you want to expand on that a little?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the excellent presentation, because it taught me a lot, and I can pass it on to the students that I teach. I've been teaching for 20 years adventure education, and I was saying to somebody else on the chat, I could probably count on my hand how many Black students I've taught and got into the adventure education sector. So yeah, it's definitely an issue, and it would be great to work out how we can you know, make that change so that it is an option for people. You know, they feel they do want to do it, because I think it is seen as cheesy, you know, sort of out of reach, and yeah, somebody else's game. I think, to be honest, that's how I with the lads that I've worked with and the girls that I've worked with, that's how it sort of comes across, that there's a why would I do that job?
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about sort of in outdoor like leadership kind of roles, or?
Yeah, being an instructor. I mean, we train students. I work in a college and manage a group of teachers, and our job is to get school leavers into the adventure education sector. So, you know, to go and get that first job as an instructor with PGL or something like that. And, you know, it's a stepping stone for youngsters into an amazing sector, you know, that where money isn't really sort of the prime mover sort of thing. So, yeah, I guess that is my concern, is that some people don't see that as sort of important to them, you know, because they don't have, like your excellent presentation has told me, that there's that connection isn't there. So yeah,
it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, I think. Potentially, you know, having role models can be hugely valuable, because, you know, when you see someone that's a leader or doing amazing things in their field, you know, and you want to emulate that, or you feel inspired. So I think, yeah, I mean, sort of having good role models can be a really valuable first step. But also, I think, you know, I touched on that in the presentation. It's like, how are we marketing? How are we marketing outdoor ed, or how are we marketing like outdoor instructors? Because in the end, it does sort of fit a certain stereotype sometimes, and so it kind of has to be like, I don't know, cool or appealing to that younger generation, that it's going to be something they really want to do. So it's sort of, yeah, it's a bit multifaceted, isn't it? But yeah.
I mean, looking for black role models for climbers, I've literally just found Trevor Messiah. He's like the only guy that I've found that, and I've nearly got a podcast going with him, but students have got a bit of screen fatigue at the moment, and they've spent so long that they don't want to do it. But yeah, just a great presentation. So thank you for doing that, putting that together. Yeah,
definitely check out Carmen's project One Climbing, and there's also in the link there's Climb XR as well. They're based in London, so they're so Carmen's working quite closely with those groups to get instructors to, like, through the qualifications and through the levels, to become climbing instructors and do their awards. So working with underprivileged communities and getting them through those levels to become climbing instructors or outdoor instructors. So I think I've got your email, haven't you? I can give you Carmen's details as well. You might be worth getting in touch with her personally.
Great, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, to form a link with her and you know, offer the course up to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you.
Could I come in here? Just, I noticed there was a question from Richard Davidson earlier about what's the state in outdoor education, and kind of relates back to this whole issue. And I did a bit of research into this about a month or two ago, and you know, I've been aware that I got involved in outdoor education as a teacher, and it introduced me to this whole game. But I've also been aware how much has been lost in like 3 decades of education cuts. And the main figures I've picked up recently were that in the last 30 years, the number of outdoor centres run in Scotland have halved. So that's a pretty significant loss. And the ones that remain, the half that remain, are almost all privately run, which tend to be aimed towards the odd day out, not the like full week of taking a school team into to do an intensive sort of taster in a whole range of different things. So in many ways, it's like there are some of these centres that have got awards for being, you know, tourist day out of the region sort of thing. But when you think about what that means in terms of outdoor education, it's very, very limited. So there are problems there. But the positive thing is that there's a parliamentary subcommittee looking at the whole issue and trying to G up the system and get more opportunities there. People are looking at it more. So hopefully we'll see some progress. Otherwise, we just have to do it from our end, I'm afraid.
It does unfortunately pick up with a comment that was made much higher up the chat line by Alex Watson, who's working with Urban Adventure, working with Urban Adventure Base in Tower Hamlets, trying to get kids in poverty into outdoor activities. And he commented they'd been working with Snowbase and the council removed their funding.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of outdoor education. There's no money left. There's no government money.
Yeah, and even with like D of E, if you want to do something like rock climbing, you have to pay for it yourself. You know, it's a separate package. And who's going to do that if they're short of cash when they can go walk in and cover the area, you know, more cheaply, shall we say? So yeah, cash is a big issue. Yeah.
Can you expand a bit about the reasons for the reduction of girls, women in sport generally?
In sports generally in the UK, women participation in sports has reduced significantly over the last few years as a proportion, particularly from the age of 12 to 12. There's a massive drop off from about 12, 13 upwards. So children, there tends to be quite good involvement. But when it gets to the 11, 12, there's a drop off, both boys and girls, but girls drop off significantly more than boys. And also, and generally speaking, overall level of sport take up has reduced significantly over the last 20 years. We're having the same, it's coming back to the same problem. We're trying to retain girls in our sports club. But our membership of girls and women has reduced by, it's halved over the last 10 years. And we're struggling to find the reasons how to do it, and which came back to my initial point about positive discrimination, where we now set up girls only evenings, women only evenings, because the issue that kept coming up was this issue of we felt intimidated because we were going into a sporting environment which was predominantly men. So we tried all that sort of thing. So it's just whether our speakers had their own thoughts on
that. Sorry, Tim, I wasn't entirely sure what the question was exactly. Is it just, could you just, was it about sports clubs?
No, it's about women, girls and women's participation in sport generally has fallen. And how to encourage more girls into sport and how to retain them within sport. So when they're children, the parents bring them along, but when there's a choice that children can make at the age of 12, 13, there's a significantly larger drop-off of girls than there are of boys. And the trouble is that the clubs or the things tend to be run by men or boys. And so you think, right, what do I need to think about to encourage that?
Tricky question. Bree, do you have any sort of thoughts? I'm just having a little think.
There's been some amazing TED Talks and studies done here in the US that I've sat in on and listened to, specifically about how to engage women in STEM, so science, technology, And so one of the things that they came across was that affinity groups do help, but only in the beginning. And it's only sort of like a way to get the ball rolling. But then they explained the importance, and I'll try to find the link and I'll forward it to Tselane and see if she can share it with the group. But one of the things that they noticed was that it starts with developing a sense of camaraderie amongst the women getting involved. So young girls, it seems, is what you're trying to attract. And then making sure that they have a clear vision of what their path looks like should it continue. And that's where we talked about representation really mattering, because if you don't, one of the slides that Tselane had was, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And sure, we can dream and we can try, but if it's never been done before, then it's really hard to envision yourself doing it. Before I started doing route development here in Texas, I never even thought it was possible. I was doing route development underground before I even considered that it would be possible for me to do route development above ground in the crags here in the US, because I just had never seen it done by anyone that looked like me. And when I say anyone that looked like me, I'm not even talking about Black people. I hadn't seen any women doing route development in Texas. So it was really interesting to get involved in that. And I think that if you want young women to get involved, you have to give them mentors, role models, and a sense of belonging via camaraderie. You can't just integrate a group of boys with, just a handful of girls. I think that you've got to reach out and do the outreach and try to get in front of those audiences. And sometimes, like we talked about equity, I think that may require a little bit more effort to get in front of those audiences. But Dr. Richard Louv, who wrote an amazing book, several amazing books, Vitamin N, The Last Child in the Woods, several theories on why nature is vital to our ability to thrive as humans and to grow as adolescents and young children. One of the things that he mentions is that it's so important for us to really think about getting in front of those audiences and sharing and doing the extra work that's necessary to make sure that our message of getting outside, because we all know that it's so important, that it's shared with those who wouldn't normally hear that message. So look at your audience, look at your community, look at the people that you're serving. Who are you missing from that group? And then creatively finding ways, connecting with your community and finding ways to get those folks out into your initiatives, I think is very important. One of my favorite quotes is by Senegalese forestry engineer and environmental activist Baba Diop. And he once said that in the end, we will only conserve what we love, we'll only love what we understand, and we'll only understand what we're taught. And it has driven everything that I do in nature. Because if we don't learn to love nature and teach others to love nature, she won't be worth protecting. And these amazing green spaces that mean so much to all of us, because we are outdoor enthusiasts, won't mean the same to future generations if we don't teach them to love nature as we love her. And so in the US, that's extremely concerning, because everything here is driven by our government. And the US Census Bureau projects that by the year 2045, the US is going to become a majority minority nation. So folks who identify as white will be the minority. And while that doesn't matter, what does matter is the fact that if we pay attention to any type of trends, that means that our government leaders are going to change what they look like as well. And we're going to have lots of minorities making decisions. And if we want to continue to protect these spaces, then we're going to have to instill that love and that respect into the future generations. So I think it's a great idea that you're wanting to start with the youth and involve those that are not typically involved. Connect, join forces. We're stronger together. we all want to help and diversify nature and make it accessible for everyone. So we just need to find ways to get everyone involved.
I think that is a great place to wrap up. Tselane, would you like to leave us with any parting words on that one?
Just not particularly, but just thank you everyone. Really, really great questions. And yeah, thank you, Brie and Eagle Ski Club. It's been really good to bounce some ideas across with each other and really productive chat. So yeah, really happy with that.
When I became president of the Eagle Ski Club, the first thing one of the first things I noticed was that there'd been a small but significant drop in recruitment of young people and women to the club. So I talked to the committee, and we have identified a strategic priority for a youth and diversity initiative. And Emily Taylor on the committee has stepped up and done a good job, and continues to, I'm sure, as youth and diversity officer. And so what have we done? Well, Kathy has indicated some of the things we've done. We've introduced increased financial support, more grants, more diverse grants, reduce the cost of membership. We've also, so there's that additional support. We've also reached out to St Andrews and Edinburgh University and made connections there with joint meets and support with equipment. We're working on introducing a focus group for young people, and we've increased the participation of women in the management of the club. And I've been particularly pleased to welcome Raya Tibawi and Shanthi Ravichandran to the committee. So these are some of the things we've done, but we need to do more. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And